talk to you about one misconception when we read the book of Revelation. And it goes something like this. John and his readers had no idea what the book of Revelation was about. John had no idea what he was seeing, and when the readers heard this, they had no idea what it was they were hearing. And usually it's because we conclude it's about the 21st century, is way down the road, and so John and his readers had no idea what this book was about. I just heard that recently in a class I was teaching in a church, and someone said, well, John had no idea what this stuff was all about. John didn't have any idea what he was seeing in his vision. And so I want to respond to that. Is it true that John and his readers had no idea what the book of Revelation was about? First of all, if you remember what I talked in another video about the kind of literature Revelation was, and one of the types of literature in the first century the book of Revelation belongs to is a letter. And we said a letter in the first century was meant to address the specific needs of the readers in their historical situation. And so what that means is John must have been seeing something and writing something to the readers that would address their situation. 7 churches living in the context of a hostile pagan Roman Empire, struggling to live out their faithful witness. What would the book of Revelation say to them? It must communicate something that they can understand that would address that need. I mean, just think about it with me for a minute. I mean, why would you have a book in the Bible addressed to 7 churches when they can't understand it? It's about some 20, 21 or more centuries down the road, and it has nothing to do with them. To me, that just doesn't make sense. So Revelation must have been something, as a letter, it must be something that they can grasp and understand. But when you look carefully at the book itself, there are other clues, if you're reading carefully in Revelation, that suggests it must be something that the first century readers could understand. The first clue, and these clues come at the beginning and end of the book, the first clue is found in chapter 1 and verse 3, at the very beginning of the book, where John is told, "Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and keep it." Now, depending on your English translation, you might have something like "who keep it" or "who take it to heart" or something like that. But when it says blessed are those who hear, and this is how the first readers would have received Revelation. Someone would have read it to the church, and they would have heard it read. So blessed is the one who reads it, whoever would have read it up front, standing up front of the church, and blessed are those who hear it. But it says blessed are those who hear and keep it. That idea of keeping it means to obey it. So taking it to heart is not just, appreciating it and memorizing it or whatever, but the idea is actually obeying it. Now let me ask you, how could John expect his readers to obey a book that they had no idea what it was about? How could God expect his people to obey this book if they couldn't understand it? If it was just a complete mystery to them? To me, that seems deceptive at worst. That God would command his readers, and through John would command the first Christians to obey a book that they had no idea what it was about. And not to mention that if suddenly we're the only readers that can understand Revelation in the 21st century, what does that say about 20 centuries of Christianity? Were they all in the dark and they couldn't obey the book either? So it seems to me that the call of Revelation chapter 1 and verse 3, and you see elsewhere in the book there are similar calls to obey it, to respond to it. That the call to obey the book of Revelation assumes that the readers in the first century and other centuries must be able to understand the book of Revelation to some degree. The call for the readers to obey the book of Revelation, the blessing that's given to those who obey the book, again, refers to the whole book. It's not just part of it, like chapter 2 and 3 that was addressed to the 7 churches, but it refers to the entire book of Revelation. It refers to obeying the words of the prophecy of this book, the whole book. So it seems to me that the call for the readers to obey it assumes that the first century readers would have understood what Revelation was about. I was raised in a church, not so much my family, but I was raised in a church growing up that basically said the readers of Revelation first readers had no idea what Revelation was about, and now we do. Now we understand what it's about. I would say that needs to be turned on its head and flipped around. That the first readers of Revelation understood what the book was about. And 2,000 years or more later, we're the ones that have to do the hard work of trying to figure out what Revelation was about and trying to figure out how the first readers would have understood it. If anyone, we're the ones that are in the dark. And we need to overcome that by studying the book carefully and trying to understand how the first readers would have understood it, so that then we can respond to it in the same way they did. We can hear God speaking to us in Revelation in the same way those first readers did. So the first clue that I find that suggests that the first readers did understand the book of Revelation and it did make sense to them is found at the very beginning of the book and the call to obey. How could God, speaking through John, how could God expect those first readers to obey a book that they had no idea what it was about, that they didn't understand, that was a complete enigma and mystery to them? The call to obey seems to assume that they could understand what was in the book. The second feature or second clue to understanding the fact that Revelation would have been understood by the first readers, it would have made sense to them, is found at the end of the book. And that is in chapter 22 and verse 10, at the very end of the vision, an angel comes to John and tells him not to seal up the words of the book, not to seal up Revelation. Now, why is that significant? Well, to seal up a book was to hide its contents or to keep its contents until a later time. And what is interesting is in the book of Daniel, the prophet Daniel is told to seal up his book because it's for a later time. Its fulfillment would take place at a later time in the future. But John is told just the opposite. He's told, do not seal up the words of the prophecy because the time is at hand. In other words, these things are already being fulfilled in the first century among the readers. It's not to be sealed up for a future time because it has a message directly relevant to John's readers in the first century. So the fact that John is told not to seal this up means that, again, his readers must be able to understand it. These are things that are, as John says, it's because don't seal it up. The time is at hand. The time is near. The time of fulfillment of these things in the book of Revelation, all the chapters preceding these words in chapter 22 are already being fulfilled. And again, that means John's readers must be able to understand this. This must communicate something that they could make sense of. So again, the idea that Revelation communicates information that the readers would have never understood, or John had no idea what he was seeing, the readers had no idea what they were reading, but now all of a sudden the implication is now we do. The problem too with that is that people have been saying that for centuries. People have been saying that for centuries, that now all of a sudden we understand what the book of Revelation is about. But the call to obey in chapter 1 verse 3 and the command to John not to seal it up suggests that first and foremost this was a message that could be understood by the first century readers. So once more, we need to read it through their eyes. We need to read Revelation as asking, how would the first century readers have understood this? What would John have intended to communicate to these 7 churches in the first century Roman Empire? in the Roman province of Asia Minor, these cities like Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Laodicea, how would they have read the book of Revelation? How would they have understood it? And then how does that make a difference in the way we read it and understand it and apply it to our lives today? So again, when you hear someone say, well, John and his readers really didn't comprehend the book and what was going, they didn't understand what was going on, but now we do. Again, that needs to be turned on its head. John and his readers knew exactly what was going on. If anybody, we're the ones in the dark, and we need to do the hard work of trying to understand how they would have read the book. And then when we do that, then we can ask how God continues to speak through that book to us today and continues to address us, and how Revelation continues to function as the Word of God to us today.